Welcome to episode 41 of the Sports Geek podcast. This week I catch up with Michael Briggs from the AAU to discuss all things Wallabies digital and talk about the British and Irish Lions tour. And we also look in and check in on the stadium fan engagement debate stirred up again by the Mavs' Mark Cuban.
Welcome to the Sports Geek podcast, the podcast built for the sports digital marketer. And now, here's your host on the podcast that he doesn't drink while recording, Sean Callanan.
Thanks, DJ Joel. My name is Sean Callanan from Sports Geek, and yes, sometimes it does take me a few takes to get going, and maybe I should have a beer to get things started like I do on Beers, Blokes and Business podcasts. But this is the Sports Geek podcast, so I try to stay sober. On this week's episode, I have a chat to Michael Briggs from the Australian Rugby Union, discuss things social and digital and how they engaged fans on the British and Irish Lions tour. And then later on, I have a chat with Francis Leach on the current debate that's been stirred up again with the Sacramento Kings owner Vivek Ranadive and Mark Cuban providing alternate and opposing views around engaging stadium fans and how much the smartphone should be involved. Also later on, I answer some listener questions around how we put together Sports Geek News and introduce a very special Sounds of the Game from the Melbourne Storm. And don't forget, later in the show, I'll have another one-day educational promo code. That's going to be on March 31st. If you're in Melbourne, I'd love to have you come along. But if you do know someone who needs a little bit of help understanding the social media space and how they could use it for their business, they can please send them along to sportsgeekhq.com/ODE for that one-day educational. But let's get cracking and into the discussion with Michael Briggs from the Australian Rugby Union. Very happy to welcome this guest on the podcast. He is the Manager of Online and Social Media at the Australian Rugby Union. Michael Briggs, welcome to the Sports Geek podcast.
Thanks very much, Sean. Good to be here.
No worries. So I wanted to try to touch base with you, I think it was late last year, after a really successful British and Irish Lions tour. That would have, and it was very tough to get a hold of you because it was a very busy time and it was a very successful time for the AAU.
Yep.
First of all, do you want to sort of just take us through what your role encompasses, what you oversee, and what sort of properties you're overlooking?
Yeah, absolutely. So my title, obviously, is Manager of Online and Social Media Marketing here at the AAU. I guess first and foremost, the AAU being, the governing body of the code here in Australia and having several different offspins in the sense of Super Rugby, grassroots rugby and all the competitions that fall from an Indigenous rugby perspective right through to women's rugby and sevens and so forth. My role is purely to, from a top-line perspective, devise the strategy across each of those, the social strategy across each of those lines of business. And obviously work with the various stakeholders, both internally as well as externally, at each of the state-based unions to help develop activations, leveraging social to engage fans, drive attendance, and increasingly from a social perspective, looking to leverage the technologies that we're looking to implement to help profile these people and help build the game here in Australia.
And so how many are in your team in sort of driving that digital content out of the AAU?
Yeah, so it's just the two of us at the moment. So myself and my colleague Matt Lewis. Outside of that, we've sort of started to towards the end of last year develop a really rigorous and structured plan as to how we work with each of the state unions. So whilst internally here there's only a team of two, I'm very comfortable in the knowledge that across each of the state unions there's a growing emphasis in social, and there's certainly a growing team when you look at it on a national basis. So a lot of work to do, no doubt, but I guess we've made a concerted effort to sort of focus on some of the key things and some of the key areas that we feel drive conversation around the game, drive positive conversation around the game. At certain key periods, we've got quite a strict approach as to how we approach social and how we approach content marketing, depending on what year we fall in.
Yep. So obviously your primary or your main property, and the property that most people know you for, would be the Wallabies. And as I was saying before, the Lions, the British and Irish Lions tour last year. What were some of the key successes and lessons you had out of the real big focus of most of Australia following that series last year?
Yeah, look, it was an exciting period. I think certainly since I've been here at the AAU since early 2012, it's the Lions have sort of been one of those things that's been on everyone's lips, and it probably wasn't too far after me starting that plans really started to come to fruition. Despite it being sort of a year and a half away at that stage, so it was certainly something that we were prepared with. I suppose when you look at it on a domestic tour basis, we had 12 years to prepare for it, but I think in hindsight we made sure that some of the tactics we were activating, not necessarily just from a social perspective, but from an in-game, a match day, a precinct perspective, were really exciting and not only involved our fan base, but made sure that we were able to tap into the huge amount of travelling supporters from the UK. I think there were upwards of 35,000 that travelled for the tour and made their way to most, if not all, of the tour and test matches. So it was a hugely exciting period for us. I think some of the lessons that we learnt throughout that period have really shaped our thinking for 2014. But certainly in terms of attendance being such a highly sought after tour, attendance and retail wasn't necessarily a primary focus for us. We knew that that each of the games would be in high demand, no matter if they were in Newcastle, Perth, Sydney, and no matter what team that they played. People just, I guess, really wanted to see the Lions in the flesh. So that was really good for us, and I think knowing that and having comfort in that, the attention then switched from us as to look how can we leverage the profile of this tour. How can we leverage the excitement that was growing, certainly at least a year out, to start to build some anticipation around it. So I think one of the key learnings from us, and one of the things that I personally was really impressed with, is how we were able to integrate a lot of the social content within multiple different platforms. We had, obviously support in stadium during match day. We had the ability to obviously feed a lot of that into Rugby HQ on Fox Sports.
So when you say you're feeding it into stadium and you're feeding to watch, specifically, what specific examples of content were you pushing to that traditional media and in stadium to tell people about the social components you were trying to do?
Sure. I think with the size of the team that we do have, and the need for us to continually be I guess, constructing content to filter through to quite a content-hungry audience, we developed a program off the back of our social loyalty program, Rugby Rewards, which was called a social map. And essentially what that was a listening service and a data visualization map. So we were able to, I guess, cross-examine and monitor some of the conversation that's happening around the country, both from the travelling contingent of Lions supporters and the domestic Wallabies fan base. And we were able to not only just locate and isolate where it was happening, but able to sort of help distinguish, I guess, the sentiment within each of those conversations, and be able to sort of, I guess, cross-reference that against a metric that we developed, which sort of helped determine what we would determine as the most vocal fan, or the most vocal city, the most vocal state. And beneath that, obviously looking at what they were saying and what they were talking about, being able to categorise and rank some of the conversation that was happening around what was most topical. So who's the player on everyone's lips? Specifically, what are they talking about? Some of the trending themes that people were discussing, and what we did, and quite quickly. I mean, we had right from the word go in early May last year when we launched the program, we had a huge amount of conversation being automatically fed in. We're able to cut up each of those social stories and then filter that through to the relevant areas. So, for instance, match day. If we obviously for the test in Sydney, we're able to cut up stories that were relevant to Sydney supporters. So what people in Sydney were talking about, how Sydney fans ranked in terms of their level of conversation comparative to other states and cities around the country, and sort of drive some of that in-game experience by acknowledging them, the impact they have, but also on the back of that raising awareness around the platform itself and urging conversation and registration. So that sort of concept of cutting up social stories, distributing it to the relevant platforms, was something that was really surprising for us. We found that we did the same thing for Fox Rugby HQ on Fox. There were certain stories that were relevant to either that program or the ability for us to highlight and isolate conversation around the Lions tour specific to that program, and vice versa across all of our social channels, and each of the state unions as well, obviously having tour games against the Waratahs, Force, and vice versa. We're able to cut up specific social stories that were relevant to those communities and pass that on to help spread the word.
So it really was just a bit of listening to help frame the content you were going to push back to the fans based on what they were already discussing, and sort of serving them more of what they wanted.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was always the objective for us. That was always something that we wanted to do, but the trick was with the size of the team that we had, the scale and the magnitude of the tour itself, and obviously the ability for us to deal with all different stakeholders internally, including partners, as well as all the other state unions, how to do that effectively, how to do that easily and simply, and ultimately how to automate that to cut out some of the manual labour. So we're able to do that effectively, and we got some extremely good results. And
you were talking then about your Rugby Rewards, which is your social loyalty program. Did that help, I guess, frame the conversation and drive those super avid fans to be pushing the message, to be more engaged, to be more behind the Wallabies, to rally behind, because the Lions were a brute force, both on the field and online. And for people who aren't in Australia and overseas and don't quite understand the Lions concept, you said before it's once every 12 years, because the Lions are British Lions. It's like a super team, and it was 12 years since they were last in Australia. Is that right?
Yeah, that's it. Yep.
Yeah, so it's every 6 years they get the battle happens either home or away. So it's not it's sort of Olympic-like in that it's not something that's happening every second year or every third year. It's something that you do have to plan for, every 6 years. And rugby fans, both in British and Ireland and Australia, wait for it and are just ready to go. So did that help train those fans to say, look, these Lions fans are loud, they're vocal, they're online, they're tweeting, they're bragging in our backyard. Did that help you rally, the Wallaby fan base?
Look, absolutely, and I think that the Lions having four nations effectively and four nations worth of fans grouping together to support one team. Obviously, we knew that challenge that was ahead of us, and I think 12 years ago when they were last here in Sydney, I think arguably we didn't necessarily understand the scale of that tour at the time. And, a lot of the imagery, a lot of the content that we've captured from that past tour helped frame and helped, I think, group and rally some of those fans quite easily. A lot of the imagery, I don't know if you've seen it, which is very one-sided. You're looking out at a packed, what is now Allianz Stadium, and seeing 90% of the crowd dressed in red. It was quite an emotive and quite an impactful image. So it really was some of that sentiment from the previous tour that helped drive our strategy for last year. And from a Rugby Rewards perspective, I think focusing on what we call the supporter battle between the two nations was the perfect vehicle in which to do that. We knew that the Lions fans, being as vocal as they are, and being, I guess, in such a huge number with, as I mentioned before, 35,000 touring Australia at the time, we knew that they'd be talking at scale, and we knew that essentially there was an element of risk for us. The Wallabies fans, whilst vocal and whilst passionate, it's hard to compete with four nations who are all wearing red and who are all talking quite emotionally about their team. So there was an element of risk in that for us, but a lot of the communication that we developed certainly early on And when we sort of scoped out the project in sort of early 2013, it was focused around, look, how can we, I guess, build and recognise some of that supported battle as it occurred 12 years ago, and how can we leverage that to make sure that when we flick the switch for rugby rewards and flick the switch for this social map, that people are going to recognise that, take up the challenge, and support the Wallabies. So essentially, the rugby rewards as a concept is built on, I guess, recognising and acknowledging that fan support and really allowing the fans themselves to spread that story and spread that message. And last year was absolutely no different. I think, if anything, the message was a lot clearer for them last year in light of the Lions. So absolutely, I think they were able to sort of acknowledge that, take that on the chin, and right from the word go, they did us proud.
One of the things I wanted to ask you about, I recently did a Google Hangout for the hashtag Sports Conference, and one of the topics there was sports data and, I guess, the growth of stats and the geekiness of stats. You did some stuff with your partner Accenture around delivering real-time infographics around the Wallabies games and trying to find a new way to visualize stats and give it in a consumable form. How did that go, and how was that received from a fan point of view? Because we're seeing a lot of teams these days trying to figure out a way to best represent, I guess, what that sports data to the fan.
Yeah, look, it certainly wasn't a small project. I think we probably kicked off discussions around that in January, February last year. So it was really a sort of a 5-6 month process leading up to the Lions to activate that initiative and to do it properly. Certainly a huge amount of testing, but I think, look, driven by Accenture and ourselves, it was something that we obviously knew that there'd be a huge amount of interest in the tour, and certainly from both a media perspective and a consumer fan perspective, we knew that there's a lot of passionate fans out there that like to, I guess, read between the lines, that like to immerse themselves in numbers, but I guess when you're talking about what is ultimately and admittedly quite a technical game in parts, the issue for us and the challenge for us was, how do we distill that information in a meaningful way? How do we replicate that and visualise that in a way that not only your hardcore rugby passionate can understand, but your sport enthusiast, your rugby league fan, your AFL fan, your soccer fan might be able to understand as well. So we worked with Accenture and their design team and their stats team, I guess, to develop templates for what we sort of determined as some of the critical pieces of information. These range from sort of kick accuracy right through to even things like a substitution analysis, and obviously standard stats such as possession, the amount of kicks, penalties, all that sort of stuff, and the impact that they have, and replicating that in a way that made sense to people so that they could quickly look at it and understand it. But I think for us, the tactic was really split up into two core streams, one of which was real time. So being able to update those templates and to populate those templates in a way that we could distribute them a matter of seconds or minutes after a key event had happened. And from a media perspective, being able to, I guess, provide something of value to some of our key print partners, so that they could, I guess, integrate that within their post-match summaries the following day. So for us, the real-time, and for me personally, the real-time information was where my focus was at. And what it did was it added a huge amount of weight to our live Twitter commentary. We've, I guess, had quite a set process in place as to how we cover these games, both from a domestic Wallabies perspective and international during the TRC as well as spring tour. We've got quite a set in place process as to how we conduct live Twitter commentary and how we leverage some of the other platforms to assist in updating people on key stats and information. But what this did was it really sort of added weight and some relevance and some context to some of our live tweets. And what we did is we looked at this and we were able to embed that and integrate that within our existing sort of plans, which were to, I guess, focus on some of the play-by-play statistics and commentary, ball-by-ball sort of commentary. Some of the entertaining content and image-based and video-based content that we'd be distributing, and this just added a third layer, which was around, real-time statistical information that assisted people in understanding the game better. And what we found was that, I think looking at the existing amount of conversation and mentions around the Wallabies, based on the previous year, it was easier, sort of a 30-35% increase in what we saw in the amount of mentions that we would typically get on game day.
Yeah, and I mean, it is. You were talking before about, I guess, the different types of supporters, whether they be, super passionate rugby, knowledgeable fans, and then because it is the Wallabies are a national team and big events that are coming up, you are going to get the casual fan or the bandwagon fan, and you need to produce that content that they can understand and they can engage with without saying I'm a rugby aficionado, or the other part of it is or denying their love for the other code. Like, you want to give them permission to be able to say, yes, I'm supporting the Wallabies because I'm because I'm an Australian and they're our national team, and that kind of content makes it easy for them to consume and easy for them to understand, to say, okay, I've got something to talk to my mate at the pub with. That's the kind of content that sort of helps reach that kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think in those, what we call those higher profile rugby years, those years where there is a key event in our calendar, be it a Lions Tour or a Rugby World Cup, a Rugby Sevens World Cup, and soon to be Olympics. These are all years that we need to make sure that we're broadening that conversation, making rugby as accessible as possible, and we're leveraging some of that increasing chatter around the game to drive a broader audience to our channels. So this was, I guess, one of a few tactics, Rugby Rewards being the other, that really sought to do that in a fun way, in an engaging way, and in a simple way that had relevance, real-time relevance, and something that they could, as you say, latch on to and help them sort of pass that on to their own social networks as a means of displaying their own patriotism.
So then the next question is, what are the plans for 2014, and how do you help, I guess, keep those fans on the escalator that we see from a fan point of view? How do you keep progressing those fans to be deeper engagement with Australian rugby and with the Wallabies and with Super Rugby? How do you? I mean, one of the challenges when you're looking after a national team that has its peaks and troughs in, we're active, we're in camp, and then we're playing games, we're on TV, we're in everyone's psyche too. Oh, now it's 6 months of we're not going to see the Wallabies for a while. What's it like from your point of view to keep that conversation going or keep that interest going in that off season period, like when all the players go back to their clubs and things like that? How do you keep that the interest in the national team without being in that, you don't want to fall into the trap of I'm just putting out content to keep my social graph up and going and annoying these fans that are just new to go, oh, I don't want to be involved with that all the time. I'm quite happy within that space. What's your sort of take on that sort of, I guess it's a conundrum when you are running sort of a national team type account?
Yeah, look, it's a unique challenge, isn't it? And we are quite distinct from some of the other codes here in Australia in the sense that typically, in a calendar year, we would only really get access to the Wallabies for what would be sort of 3, if not 4 months a year, and the rest of the time they're obviously sit in their Super Rugby teams and have an off season. But I think the way that we've approached 2014 is vastly different to how we've approached previous years, in the sense that what we're taking is a one rugby approach, where we're our primary goal is to re-engage our passionate fan base with the game, and this isn't just at a Wallaby level. It's focusing at very much at grassroots, looking at the opportunities that present themselves within women's rugby, and obviously our national sevens team. Our sevens team, men's and women's, are now being centralised out of Narrabeen, which is quite an innovative approach. So effectively, we get access to those guys 11 months a year. So there's plenty of other opportunities and plenty of other topical and interesting conversation points and opportunity that we have to drive rugby and the interest in rugby outside of the Wallabies. But obviously, recognising that the Wallabies is our hero brand to an extent. It's what the bulk of rugby fans in Australia have a distinct knowledge of and interest in. And so, from a Wallabies perspective, our goal this year is look at what can we do to help sort of reshape some of the thinking around the Wallabies. How can we, linking back to our objective of re-engaging these passionates who, to a certain extent have experienced these highs and lows with us over the last 2 to 3 years or more. We want to make sure that we're building a story as early as possible in the year as we can, to help sort of link back to that objective of re-engaging those people and really reinstilling and reinforcing some of the pride and passion and the heritage in that jersey. So for us, it's based around how we develop a content plan, and this content plan can sit across video content, across imagery, across audio, how we leverage partners and some of the opportunities they have to activate these and tap into prospective Wallabies this year. How do we sort of work with them, work with the team management internally, and work with the state unions to develop a plan that helps address our core offering this year? So, from a video perspective, I mean, largely this is probably arguably one of the more important things that we're looking to activate this year, is to have a steady stream of video content that helps tell a variety of different stories. One of the things that I guess is of real importance to us is how we sort of profile some of the players within our squad. How do we profile some of the Bo Ryans of our code, of which, certainly there's been some coverage of Nick Cummins from the Western Force of late. So that's just one example of some of the personalities and some of the opportunities we have within that squad, of which there's, growing and increasing appeal. So I guess from our perspective, when we look at video content, largely our plan falls in a few different buckets. One of which would be sort of how we sort of leverage some of the really rich archival content that we have on tap, and this obviously spanning back to the 60s and 70s, some of the heyday of non-professional and professional rugby. How can we utilise some of that content there? Some of the classic Wallabies that we have obviously direct access through internally, to help tell the story of the Wallabies of yesteryear, some of the pride and passion that they feel, some of the interesting stories, and ultimately some of the optimism they have for the future. So we saw, towards the end of last year that obviously with the Spring Tour performance, that there was a shift in mindset, there was a shift in culture within the team, and I think that's one thing that we're really trying to leverage and emphasise this year. That the 2014 is a new year. We've seen some positive performance towards the end of last year, but what we want to do is to re-emphasise the fact that that the 2014 will be vastly different in how the players approach their game, but obviously vastly different approaches to how we market them. So, I guess historical rivalry content, that's an area that we want to focus and emphasise. And we've got a whole range of different ideas that we've taken to team management in order to sort of get their feedback on that. But outside of that, there's an element of us entertaining fans, entertaining them for entertainment's sake. I think making sure that we've got an interesting and consistent and frequent artillery of content to distribute to them, that gets them engaged, that gets them interested, that gets people talking, and ultimately shows a different side of rugby. I think our vision, especially with the social team and some of the content initiatives that we drive, from rugby rewards through to real-time statistical analysis, through to video content, through to even something as simple as Twitter Amplify. All of these are tactics that are focused around bringing people closer to the game. Be it a cliche or not.
Yep.
But bringing people closer to the game, and I think making sure that we're emphasising that there's a real need for us to be innovative. There's a real need for us be open with our fans. There's a real need for us to acknowledge what they're saying, and ultimately we want to communicate to them that what we're hearing from them, some of the learnings that we're leveraging. All of these are things that we're using to help shape our approach for 2014, right from the video content we create through to Rugby Rewards and our loyalty program, through to Super Rugby and Twitter Amplify, and making highlights content more accessible. So I think that in a nutshell is sort of our approach for 2014, and if that the way that'll be done will be vastly different depending on what channel that we use. But our call to action, our marketing communication this year is focused around posing the question back to fans. In a sense where we have a direct line to our players, and we know there's obviously a huge amount of passion and pride that they feel. But I think in terms of our fan base, they've, as we said, experienced some of the highs and the lows. So I think for 2014, it's based around how we can pose a question back to our fans, saying that we're in. We've got a lengthy rugby calendar this year. It's something that we've seen sort of certain elements of improvement in towards the end of 2013. We're in for the long haul, and posing the question back to them. So a lot of what we're doing is focused around this tagline of "Where in are you?" and that "Are you" component is what will be sort of retrofitted and reflected back to fans across a range of different tactics that we launch in different ways.
So this year you've got a Test series against France. You've got the Rugby Championship with some tests against New Zealand and Argentina, South Africa, and then you've got the Bledisloe Cup, obviously in August, being your key events around the Wallabies. I just want to finish up the interview, and I guess a lot of questions I get when talking with teams and people running their digital teams and social is what metrics what metrics should I be following? What are my key indicators that what I'm doing is working? Do you want to give us some insight in, you've got these matches coming up against France, and obviously the Bledisloe Cup, All Blacks is always a high focused point. What are some of the metrics? You said video is going to be a big thing for this year, and there's a stack of teams that are diving into video and making sure that it's available for the mobile, and they keep seeing that the more video that they produce to their fans, the more video that they want. What are some of the key metrics for you in 2014 that you're going to be keeping an eye on and trying to track and hit marks on?
Yeah, look, it's a good question, and I think it's one of those things that no matter what digital exec you talk to, they've all got a different perspective. Look, I think for us, based around our objectives, we tend to alternate, as I think I alluded to before, between a range of different objectives depending on what year we find ourselves in. So this year, for instance, what we call our standard or our typical rugby year, the emphasis in these years is very much how we can sort of look to engage fans, how we can look to develop content and tactics that get them talking, how we distribute that content to the right places at the right time.
So with that kind of stuff, like if it is engagement, are we talking raw form of comments on Facebook posts and mentions and comment, the usage of hashtags from a Twitter point of view, or photos shared on Instagram from a pure execution point of view? Are those the kind of numbers that you're keeping an eye on to say, okay, we're not in game mode, the Wallabies aren't in camp, what's our engagement on Facebook look like? Are we still getting chatter happening on Instagram? Is it that kind of stuff that from a lower level point of view, when you're talking to both your team in trying to, from an execution point of view, are they the numbers that you're sort of diving at to say, way to go guys, we got 1,000 photos on Instagram this month? Or is that the kind of thing that you're looking at when you're talking about those kind of numbers?
Yeah, look, absolutely. I mean, depending on what channel you find yourselves in, they all sort of measure engagement in different ways, but absolutely engagement rate on Facebook, absolutely views on YouTube, absolutely mentions across Twitter, and more broadly, the volume of mentions as reflected throughout our Radio 6 social listening campaign. These are all things that we're keeping constant tabs on. And as you say, we're outside of the Wallabies season at the moment. So I think what we can do is base this on, where we were last year, or potentially last year is not an accurate gauge. The year before, where we were last year at this exact point in time, how can we develop tactics that we're sort of seeing considerable growth in based on a similar period in the past, and beyond that, how we can accurately as possible measure sentiment on top of that. So not only are we getting more people talking, but are they talking more positively around the game? Are they talking more positively around certain individuals and certain aspects and announcements that we're making? There's a lot of, I guess, important announcements that we've made so far this year. The announcement of the NRC competition, for instance. So that is an example. We've got a strict process as how to monitor and measure those announcements, and how to get a sense of what the fans are saying, and therefore what the approach is from there on in. So both from a general consumer fan engagement perspective, engagement metrics for this year are our primary focus, and beyond that around announcements, that's a separate kettle of fish. But how we're monitoring clearly what people are saying, and how we're feeding that back internally into our business process and media approach.
And it is a matter of almost sort of a campaign approach in the different types of modes of the season you're in, whether you're in this off-season mode, or as you're leading up into the France test, or some of the tests around August and the Bledisloe Cup. It's important also, I think, not just to look at that macro level, like how's the whole season gone, but to also look at that, how did those infographics go? Because if you're not looking at that micro, like that campaign and content piece kind of thing, you're not really understanding why that piece of content worked, and you're just always at this, I guess, 15,000 feet view of the world, and you're not seeing what happened. So it's sort of it is a mix of those two sort of strategies to figure out how what is working.
Yeah, and you're right, and overlaying some of that micro data, if you like, combining that with, say, I guess the aura around a particular period of the year, be it a Lions tour. There's nothing to say that if we rolled out real-time infographics this year, that they would work as well as they did last year. It might just potentially be where we were last year, the amount of appeal that particular tour had that made that successful. So going through a process where we're tapping into fans to make sure that some of the things that we're planning, we're not just basing it off past successes and rolling it out again, that we're building it and making sure that it taps into a need that is relevant to the context that we're in this year, and where the team's at and where our fans are at in that overall fan journey.
Well, thank you very much for coming on the podcast. I will link in the show notes some of the stuff that we discussed with some of the infographics and some links to rugby rewards and some of the stuff that you did in the Lions tour, as well as links to all the different properties that you're in control of. So everyone can know, tell everyone what your Twitter handle is, so everyone can send you a tweet and tell you that they've been listening.
Perfect.
Your Twitter handle is?
Mick_83.
Mick_83. Again, that'll be in the show notes, and also link to Michael in LinkedIn if you want to connect with him. Thanks very much for coming on the podcast. Next time I'm in Sydney, we'll have to catch up for a beer.
Sounds good, mate. Perfect. Thank you very much.
Sign up for Sports Geek News at sportsgeekhq.com/sign-up-now.
Thanks again to Michael Briggs from the Australian Rugby Union for joining me there and talking about what the Wallabies do. Really interested to hear from you, listeners, especially the ones that are running teams, on that off-season question, especially from the national team, is something that we are always working with teams like the Socceroos, who are similar to the Wallabies in that have those peaks and troughs in engaging fans. But what do you do in the off-season? How do you engage your fans when there isn't content from the court or the field? What are some of the tactics you do in the off-season? Love to hear that. Just a quick question from a listener. We had Baz. I don't know how to exactly say your name, Baz, but you know who you are. Send me a message asking me how we put together the Sports Geek News. You can sign up for Sports Geek News, as that ad said previously, that promo. Just simply go to sportsgeekhq.com/sign up now. There's no real big trick or tool used there, Baz, we curate the list pretty much off my feed and off the social accounts for Sports Geek. So any article that I read, I will push out via my Twitter account, Sean Callanan, or the Sports Geek one, as well as LinkedIn and Facebook and the like. And then Meg puts together the newsletter pretty much based on your clicks. So if a article gets a lot of clicks and retweets and engagement, then we know that that's an article that you as subscribers to the newsletter will want to hear. So it is pretty much crowdsourced. So it is via your clicks. So if you do miss an article that I may tweet or put up on LinkedIn, more often than not, then you will find that article in the weekly Sports Geek news, or if you don't want to get it straight away in your inbox, or in case you missed it. So you can look on the website, look at the in case you missed it, to see some of the articles that are in that post. But yeah, it's still hand built, and we use some metrics to find out exactly which articles are popular. And then we put it into a MailChimp template, and it gets delivered to your inbox. So thanks, Baz, for that question. This week on Grandstand, one of the articles that actually was one of the top ones in a recent Sports Geek news was Mark Cuban's response on stadium marketing, engaging fans inside the stadium. And it was an update on a blog post that he did, I think it was around 2010. He probably did another one in 2011. And he pretty much came back on and reinforced his views that he doesn't want fans using their smartphones. So here's the discussion I had with Francis on ABC Grandstand.
To Sports Geek HQ now. Sean Callanan, digital sports guru, is with us. To tweet or not to tweet at the game, to take your phone or to leave it at home. Interesting debate going on at the moment, particularly in American sport, around the role of digital media in the in-game experience. Morning, Sean.
Good morning, Frank. How are you doing?
I'll be much better when I can actually hear you. How are you going now?
Oh, I'm still here, yeah.
You're there. Fascinating debate going on between some heavy hitters in American sport about the role of social media in the in-game experience.
Yeah, it's been a long-held debate, and we've discussed the trials and tribulations of a sports fan not being able to connect and not being able to tweet or send out a post or text their mates while they're at a game, and it's a worldwide problem that they're trying to solve, because you get 30,000, 40,000 people in the one place, and it does put strain on mobile networks. And recently, the NBA All-Star Game, they normally have some technology meetings when the All-Star Game happens, and it was happened in New Orleans recently. And the new Sacramento Kings, one of the new Sacramento Kings owners, Vivek Ranadive, comes from a technology background and is really sort of pushed all his chips in and said, we want to be one of the tech savvy, the Sports Geek like is how I would call it, teams in the NBA, and we really want to give fans that connected experience. And he's sort of saying the NBA and the Kings overall need to lift their game to offer that connected fan every opportunity that they want, because some of the arguments, some of the debate over the last couple of years has been, and we see it here in Australia, is it's better to watch the game in the comfort of my home with my high-definition TV, with my second and third screens if I want, and I can pull up stats and highlights and recaps and everything like that.
It's a really attractive proposition, and I reckon we're seeing a bit of it, and we're talking more about this today on Grandstand Breakfast with the NRL. Now, they've had their best off-season ever, and their television ratings will be through the roof, but people are sort of staying away from the games. Only 28,000 on Thursday night, only 18 last night for the Broncos and the Bulldogs. And maybe people are making a choice. I'd rather be at home with my iPad or phone, tweeting about the game, talking to my mates, watching it in high def.
Oh, well, I think the NRL it's a historical problem more than a technology problem. I mean, but the fans have been trained to watch it at home and have live coverage. Have had live coverage, sooner and quicker than the AFL. So it's not so much a tech issue for mine. It's just that they've been trained to watch the game and not be, you've got to be there. I really enjoyed Richard Hines' piece in the telly saying, you can't complain about the NRL if you're not turning up. So yeah, you've got to appeal to those fans that want the comfort And then, so the other side of the debate, and has been long standing on that side of the debate. So when Vivek sort of put out those points, a lot of the articles use Mark Cuban, owner of the Dallas Mavs, and if you're listening to Grandstand today via streaming device, you've got Mark Cuban to thank, because he started internet radio effectively by streaming it in his garage, and sold it to Yahoo, and is now he did it at the top of the .com boom, so now he owns the Mavericks. So he understands the space and understands the tech, and you would think he would be definitely in the I want to be connected, I want every fan to be connected, but he's really in the I want every fan to be completely immersed in the fan experience.
And he writes this article, which I've read, about going to a college basketball game, and, as the man that created, the online experience and streaming, he doesn't want his phone there, and he just enjoys an old-fashioned, pep rally type basketball experience.
Yeah, and if you've ever been to any NCAA tour, any NCAA games, they're all like that. Like, I've been to NCAA basketball games, which Mark Cuban attended, and it is 40, 48 minutes, whatever the length of the period is, of just pure excitement, fans jumping up and down.
Very ritualised, isn't it?
Yeah, and it is the youthful enthusiasm of college students. So, yeah, what his point was, none of them were pulling out their phones, no one were checking things. They were fully engaged with the game for the whole game. And he's trying to recreate that experience because he wants people to walk away with the experience saying, I had a terrific time at the Mavs game. And I think this is where the debate, it's sort of become the digital religion wars in effect. And people are so adamant of, I'm on this side or I'm on this side, when really, as a strategy guy for a team, you've got to look at the different types of fans. So, for instance, I agree with a lot of what Mark Cuban's saying, because that's the type of fan I am.
So you'll go to a game, even though you're, the sports geek, you won't pull your phone out during a Collingwood game and start tweeting away. You wait till afterwards.
But as Mark said, I'll turn up, I will check in, I'll take my photo beforehand, I'll have my sort of digital ritual, but when I'm watching the game, I'm watching the game and I'm invested in that game. And I think, that's sort of where Mark falls. But the thing is, there are different segments of the customer market now, or the sports fan market, that do want to engage with that. And it's not just here, giving your phone to your son or daughter to distract them while you're watching the footy or the sport at hand. Some fans, that's how they communicate. They might be having that banter backwards and forwards with someone backward, and that's what they do every single day.
And there are different sports that will lend themselves to that opportunity. Say, for instance, Test cricket, which we love and baseball will be the same because of the gaps that give you an opportunity to be involved that way. The other aspect to it too is that there is a very particular self-interest in sports organisations having you do that, because you provide data to them that they can then, as they would like to use the phrase, which I don't think is a word in English dictionary yet, but it might be soon, monetise. So they know what you're interested in. They know who your favourite player is. They know how often you come. They know, and this is the thing that Ravenek talks about. He wants to know, do you buy Coke or do you buy Pepsi at the stand? Do you like popcorn? Do you like hot dogs? We want to know your profile so we can pitch directly to you.
Yeah, and that's the thing, the savvier the stadium from a digital point of view, the better that those offers can be. That, they can pop up and say, Francis, would you like to order that Pepsi and hot dog in your seat? And of course, if you just click the button, you can. So that's the opportunity. And then the other part of it is the more capacity that the stadium has and the more encouragement that the fans do, as they're sending out information and showing how great the experience is, they're doing it in a live manner. And they become effectively an advertising arm for the team. We've seen that in, things like the SCG and the Pink Test, because they had the capacity, the fans had a capacity to get on. They were all sending out photos of the victorious Test and the Australian cricket team and saying how great it was to be at the game. And so that's part of the problem with like the NRL, to get people there. We need the fans there to say it's a really great experience. It's a different experience to the home experience. So it is a mix, but you definitely have to cater for, these digital natives that are always connected and, want this extra experience. They want to be able to, when the timeout comes, they want to watch that replay of that Blake Griffin dunk or Boogie Cousins if he's at the Kings, to go, I want to see that play, and then I want to be able to send that out to my friends and say, I saw it live, here it is, look how good it is, but you won't believe how it was live.
Learn from Sports Geek at our Sports Geek ODE one-day educational. Go to sportsgeekhq.com/ODE.
So, where do you sit on that? As I said, it's almost a religious digital debate. Are you in the Vivek Ranadive camp or the Mark Cuban camp, or are you like me? Understand that there are different segments of fans and you have to cater for them all. How often do you use your mobile phone or your smartphone when you're at a game? Again, love to hear your feedback. Either hit me up at Sean Callanan or at SportsGeek and join in that debate. Want to quickly wrap up this episode. We're hitting the 50-minute mark, and if you're running while you're doing this, congratulations. I'm not quite yet up to running 50 minutes consecutive with my Achilles rehab, but I am getting there. As I said earlier, I'm hoping to play pickup in Miami in July for seats. So, BJ, I'm ready to take you on one-on-one, hopefully. So, this week's Sounds of the Game. This one's going to be a shout-out to another podcast. It's good to see the Melbourne Storm launching their own podcast this year. Former guest Dan Pinney is hosting, and the Storm are now doing a podcast. You can go to melbournestorm.com.au/iTunes to find it on iTunes. So I'm going to use them for Sounds of the Game, where they interview Cameron Smith.
Last one, TV show you can't live without. Go on a minute.
I can't. Do I have to say this? Well, I'll put it this way. Well, it's not on anymore, but I couldn't go without watching.
No spoilers here on the Sports Geek podcast. You'll have to tune in to the Melbourne Storm cast. Available now on iTunes to listen to that chat with Australian skipper and Storm skipper and Queensland skipper. He is an NRL legend, Cam Smith. You can follow him on Twitter, CamSmith9. I would not have admitted that was my favourite show, Cam. You're a braver man than I. But tune in to the podcast, and well done to Dan and Jono for kicking that off. For social media post of the week, it's going to be another client shout out. Congratulations to the South Sydney Rabbitohs. Not only did they win the opening match of the NRL season, defeating the defending premiers, the Sydney Roosters, on Thursday night in the NRL season opener, they also crashed through the 200,000 Facebook fan barrier in the meantime, which takes them to the fourth team in the NRL to reach that milestone. So congratulations to the guys, the Rabbitohs. I know they've worked very hard to get to that milestone. So congratulations to guys like Jez and Chris, who's now in the role there at the Rabbitohs. So that clock ticking is the way I should say it, tells me it's time to wrap up this episode, get out, and let you get back to your business. This is episode 41, and since we had a discussion about Mark Cuban, and I have shared my story about Dirk Nowitzki previously on the podcast, I was lucky enough to see Dirk score his 20,000th NBA point. I'm going to dedicate this episode 41, to the one and only Dirk Diggler, Dirk Nowitzki. So you can get the show notes at sportsgeekhq.com/41. That's it for this week's episode. Don't forget the Sports Geek One Day Educational coming up in Melbourne. It's for a wider audience than just sport. If you are in sport, you're more than welcome to come along. It will take you through all the things that we teach all of our sports teams, but with a bit of a wider scope from a brand perspective. If you have someone who is running a business, running marketing for different types of businesses, and wants to understand how to use social media, obviously we'll be covering the big three: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, looking into things like Facebook ads, content strategy, running competitions, pulling it all together. And on top of that, I've got a couple of good mates of mine, Steve Sammartino and Josh Rowe, who are from the Beers, Blokes and Business podcast, really savvy digital guys coming in to also share some of their insights as well. So you can go to sportsgeekhq.com/ODE. And as it was for last week, this week's promo code is Dirk, and that will get you $50 off. More than happy for you to share that with your friends. Anybody in Melbourne that you think might want to go, please send them that link and send them a tweet. Let them know who I am, and more than happy to answer any questions before then. Right, closing 2 cents. I'm going to go back to our discussion that we had with Michael, especially around this fan data and infographics. Fans want stats, so work out creative ways to deliver them via your content platforms.
Now, I love what you've done with the name, by the way. The One Day International, the One Day Educational. Monday, 31st of March, 2014 at the Honey Bar. Check it out, guys. Come on, SportsGeekHQ.com is the place to go to find out a whole lot more about it.
Please leave a review on iTunes. Go to sportsgeekhq.com/iTunes. Listen to Beers, Blokes, and Business at beersblokesbusiness.com. Thanks for listening to the Sports Geek Podcast.